for fashion, for the way they look. They don't respect their feet properly, and your feet have to carry you through life. A quarter of your bones are in your feet, in the whole human body. So there are 206 bones in the human body, of which 26 bones are in your feet, in each foot. We have about 250,000 sweat glands in our feet, and we excrete about half a pint of water every day through our feet. We walk the equivalent mileage of 115,000 miles in our lifetime, which is the equivalent of walking around the earth 4 times.
Wow.
So you see, we are very much, and you know, the thing is also, if you don't get the right shoe, if you're someone who's diabetic or you have an autoimmune problem or something like that, then your feet can end up getting very sick very quickly, and you can lose toes. And if your walking style changes, what then eventually happens is it puts a huge amount of stress on other parts of your body. So if you imagine, if you are a car and you're not driving on the right tires, what happens is the suspension is damaged further up. So for example, if you don't get the right footwear or the right support for your feet, then what happens is you put stress on your knees, on your lower back, and your whole anatomical gait, as we call the gait stance, becomes uneven. And that then creates serious pressures. And 60% of knee pain and back pain is often related to the way we walk.
Well, that's incredible, because, you know, for, you know, an average person, average weight, you're thinking, I'm still pretty young, I've never had to go to a podiatrist, I think I'm okay. But I wear heels every day. So maybe we can talk about some of the different fashions for men and women, how we're wearing them and what we should be doing instead.
So, interestingly enough, the average woman owns about 25 to 30 pairs of shoes. My wife has about 75, but we won't talk about that. And what happens is when you buy shoes, you see, the average man owns about 4 pairs of shoes. So when you tell a man go and buy a pair of shoes, they're looking for comfort, support. They're looking to think, can I walk from here to my office and not feel pain in my feet? Women look at shoes and look at a shoe and go, oh, that looks nice. And that will match that dress that I haven't worn for 2 years, so I'm going to buy it. So we think of fashion first. And this is the problem, because what you're doing is you're shoving your feet into shoes about the size of a pencil. So what's happening is you're squashing your feet up, and then the higher the high heel. So a heel is good for you, because we walk forward. So gravity, when you stand on the ground, you have to be you're walking forward, you're not walking backwards. So if you've got a slight heel, it's actually good for you, because it forces you to tighten your bottom muscles properly and holds your back properly. And also, a heel also defines the back of the leg and the calf. And this is why a lot of women wear a lot of high heels, because they want to show that they have really nice calves, because it defines the calf. But in doing that, what it tends to do is, if the heel's too high, it then forces you onto the forward part of your foot. For example, I often say to people when I do any form of show, or when we do anything like that, when we're teaching people, if you stand on your toes and walk around, how long can you do that for? It's very difficult, because you get very tired. Now, if you're doing that constantly all day, what you're doing, you're putting 75% more pressure on the front of the foot. And then, because you've got a shoe that is the size of a pencil, so you're shoving your foot, which is probably twice that, into that sort of size, what you're doing is all the toes are bunching up together. So if you look at a model foot, what you're doing is you're actually pushing all the toes like that. And over time, what happens is you develop excess tissue or corns or calluses that develop on the extremities of the toes. They start to develop extra pressure points on the foot, which then can ulcerate. And if the skin becomes too thick, then what happens is you end up with a serious burning sensation. And also, that reminds me that if you go for pedicures a lot...
Well, that's what I was going to bring up, because as women, we just think, listen, taking care of my feet means wearing the high heels every day, but going for my pedicure every so often, so that's fine.
Pedicures are fine, but you know, the thing with pedicures is you've got to be careful when you go for a pedicure, because one, you have to make sure that the instruments are sterile, because in certain cases, what can happen is you can breed infections in these places if you don't have proper sterilized instruments. Two, if you rub the hard skin of your foot when it's wet and soft, you're creating what they call hyperkeratinization of tissue, which basically means you're developing more hard skin. Women often tell me, they say, you know, I used to go to the pedicure every 2 months, and now I have to go every 2 weeks, because the skin's getting more and more and more. And I'm not walking any more than I was 2-3 months ago. It's because what's happening is when the skin is wet and soft and vulnerable, you're taking a pumice stone to it and you're scrubbing like anything, and you're irritating the tissues. So what the body does, it's an amazing thing, it produces more cells to protect the foot. And that's why. So when you rub the hard skin off, you should always do it when the foot is dry.
Okay.
And another thing, always remember to buy your shoes in the afternoon.
So explain that part, because you mentioned that to me earlier and I never heard of that.
Because the thing is, if you buy your shoes in the morning, by the afternoon they're too small. Because you've shoved your foot into something that fits you perfectly in the morning. But as we walk around, and it's very hot at the moment, your foot will increase by about half a size. And it will be too small for the shoe, and then you'll be struggling, okay? And remember also, I mean, you know, a shoe should always bend properly as well. So for example, if you're looking at a shoe like that, okay, this is a Chuppel sandal or whatever, the simple sandals. If you can do that, it's not a very good shoe.
Really?
Yeah.
How come?
So if you can do that with a shoe, it's not very good.
I can do
because
that with
you
a lot
see,
of my ballet flats.
where do we, when we walk, Judy, where do we bend? We bend at the front of the foot. So basically, when you bend, we should bend there.
Right.
Because we toe off at that position. So when we bend, we toe off at that position. So what happens if a shoe collapses like that? That's not where we bend. Our foot has a joint there and there. So basically, it should rock from there, and heel to toe is corrective. So if you wear the wrong shoe, it doesn't allow to facilitate proper walking, which doesn't allow proper venal return. So the blood goes down to the feet but doesn't come back properly if you don't wear the right shoe. So it doesn't facilitate good blood flow back to the heart.
So, I mean, ballet flats, similar to this, are very popular amongst women. And, you know, for women that you say, listen, heels are not appropriate to wear every day. They strain your knees and whatever else. We think this is the alternative. So this is not the alternative.
No, because this has no heel. It is like a sponge. I can rotate it more than 90 degrees, and I can bend it to that position. So what will happen is there's no biomechanical or orthopedic support in that shoe. So what happens is, after time, you'll be, instead of walking properly with this, heel to toe, you will then shuffle like this.
Oh, wow.
So you see, this is what happens. When people wear the wrong or inappropriate footwear, the shoe doesn't hold their foot properly, or the foot doesn't hold the shoe. So what happens is they don't go heel to toe properly. So they tend to change their gait and either drag their feet out, or they don't walk properly, or they tend to walk on their toes very much because they don't have enough support at the back. Okay,
so I just want to talk quickly about heel height and you know, width, because you were mentioning this to me earlier. The chunky heels are popular with women right now, and they think, listen, as long as my heel is a little bit thick, I'm okay with whatever height. So maybe you can talk about that.
Okay, well, the thing is, you know, it doesn't matter whether it's a chunky heel or whether it's a thin heel, really. The only difference, I think, is if you have a very thin stiletto heel, what you can do is you could go over on your ankle. If you step on an undulating surface, you're going to go over much more easily than if you have a chunky heel. It's about height. No more than 2 inches.
2 inches?
About 2 inches, 2.5 max. Don't go any higher than that, because what you're then doing is forcing too much pressure through the front of your foot, and you're not allowing your foot to be used as it should be used.
So later on I want to talk about, you know, the long-term effects that you were mentioning to me earlier, but we do have a volunteer here in studio. There is a contraption that you brought with you here. So maybe Shiku, you can just come up.
Okay, hi Shiku.
You can stand over here.
So what I want to do is, this is basically called a Harris mat, and what we do is we take a simple foot impression of her foot to see whether she's flat-footed, she's got a high arch. And what this can tell us podiatrists is how she walks. So, for example, people who are very flat-footed and have what they call a pronating stance, so basically walk very much on the inside of their feet like that, are people who will end up with a lot of knee pain. And people with very excessively high arches tend up with a lot of hip and back pain because they don't have the stability in their foot. So, for example, a very flat foot you're acting as a shock absorber too much. And a very high arch foot, your foot is not shock absorbing. Like having a car, if you pump up the tires too much on a car, then the car will shake.
So most people are not aware of whether they are flat-footed
Yeah.
or have an arch or whatever. So what you brought here enables us to test
This
that?
enables that, and this is a very simple device. It's very affordable. When we do a lot of diabetic projects around Kenya, we basically do this with all the patients to see how they stand, and then we can advise them correctively on the right type of footwear, what to look for, how to look for shoes, and what their foot is actually doing. So what we're going to do is I'll ask you to take off your shoes for me, please. So again,
Her
just
shoes with
looking,
no support.
yeah, can I have it? So again,
Let's
if
test
you're
her
talking
shoe.
on, if you test this,
Uh-oh.
then you're not looking at a very
That is
good
a
supporting
problem.
shoe. And they slip around
All of
so
my
much.
ballet flats like that, so I need to
So
reevaluate.
what I would do first was I'd look at you, so just stand straight for me and bend your, and widen your stance a little bit. Bend your knees for me. Yeah, now interestingly enough, you do have a slight turn, you're turning in a little bit. I can also tell that you're right-handed, okay? You tend to use that foot because you're turning in on that foot a little bit more. So that enables us to tell which foot you favour and what you're doing. And if you notice, if you don't mind me picking on you a little bit, if you notice your big toe is starting to turn a little bit. And that is because what you're doing is you're tending to put a lot of pressure on the inside of your foot like that. And that is starting to turn the big toe into a position. And if you continue to walk like this, by the time you're sort of 65, which is a long way off, but what will happen is you'll end up with a bunion. So I'm telling you, by the time you're 65, you will end up with a bunion. And if you look at your mother's feet, or your grandmother's feet, and you see that bunion or the big toe turning, and you say, oh, because I have feet like my parents, yes, it's because you walk in the same way that they did.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what I want you to do is I'm just going to ask you to do something. I'm going to show you. So what you're going to do is if I come over here, if you're going to walk, see where that dot is on the mat? You're going to walk through it like that, just heel to toe, and you just want to walk out through the top of the...
Just walk through it?
So put your so put your foot in the middle of it, middle, yeah, and walk through. Thank you.
So
Great.
now you have an impression of her foot.
Yeah. So if you notice that,
Okay.
now we have an impression, and she's not flat-footed.
Okay.
So
she
you
has
see,
a-
she has quite, but you can see the dark point there? You can see where you're putting a lot of pressure and stress, and you have a reasonable arch, but what it is you're turning a little bit on the inside of the heel. So what's happening is when you bend, you're going in, so your knees are turning in a little bit. And a lot of people, when they get older, say, oh, it's just arthritis.
Right.
No, it can be corrected.
So
if
how
you're
can we
younger.
correct that so she doesn't have
So,
bunions
for
at
example,
50?
when if she doesn't want to end up getting bunions and possibly getting knee pain when she's older, what she needs to do is, there's plenty of insoles on the market that you can have done, where you have something which gives you an arch support or gives you an angle change. Because, you know, a lot of our Kenyan runners are flat-footed, but they're the best runners in the world. Flat feet is not necessarily the problem. It's to do with overpronation. It's what they call a biomechanical fault. It's how you're built, it's how you came off the factory floor, and that's not your fault. But the fact is, I get a lot of kids who come into the office, and the parents say, oh, my child walks like a duck, or my child walks like a penguin. Now the thing is, most children will correct themselves by the time they're sort of 6 or 7, because you don't develop a distinctive gait pattern until you're about 6 to 8. So the thing is, I often say wait, and also remember the arches in the foot, when you have young children, haven't formed properly. So this is why most children at the age of sort of 2, they all look flat-footed, because they haven't developed their arches yet.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm always saying. So parents out there who worry about their children's feet, don't worry. If they still exhibit these problems when they're about 6 to 8, then we can actually correct these problems as they grow and develop.
Well, that's encouraging to hear that these things can be corrected. Shiku, you can put your shoes back on.
Shiku.
Thanks for being our volunteer.
And Shiku, that's what you can actually wear. So you can wear things like that, which will give you support. The problem also, again, with fashion like that, is to get insoles in fashion like that is quite challenging. And that's always a challenge we face.
I'm going shoe shopping later today. You can come.
Thank you very
All right,
much.
just, you know, we're almost out of time here, but perhaps you can just give us some final comments, overviews, especially for women watching who are wearing these heels and we're thinking, you know, I feel all right now, but the problems come a little bit later on. So, you know, do we need to make an appointment with you? What do we need to do?
No, not necessarily. You know, again, also, you know, if you're catching a matatu from about 3 hours away and your workplace is a long way away, what I would suggest you do is take a good pair of trainers, take a little bag, wear the trainers before you get to work, so that when you have to wear a shoe like that at work, you're not going to be suffering afterwards.
So you're not on it for like 8 hours a day.
Yeah, so you're not on it for 8 hours a day. And also remember, buy your shoes, like I said, in the afternoon to allow accommodation. And also, when you go to a shoe shop, make sure they measure your foot when you're standing on the ground. Not, you know how they measure you when you sit like that, and you put your foot increases by 1 size extra when you stand. So this is why they never get the size of the shoe right.
Right.
So insist that when you buy a shoe that you stand on the ground and wear it. And also, if it doesn't feel comfortable straight off the bat, don't buy it.
Bad deal.
Because this whole thing where you break your feet in, no, it'll break your foot first before you break